The champagne glasses sparkled under the crystal chandeliers. 200 guests dressed in their finest stood watching as a bride in an ivory gown prepared to walk down the aisle toward the man she loved. But in less than 3 hours, that same bride would be lying face down in a garden fountain, her veil floating in the water like a ghost, and the person who put her there was someone she had once called her closest friend. This is the story of how a perfect wedding became a perfect nightmare, and how one terrible secret destroyed 3 lives forever. It was supposed to be the happiest day of Sarah Mitchell's life. At 31 years old, she was finally marrying David Harper, the man she had dated for 6 years. The venue was a historic estate in Charleston, with manicured gardens and a view of the river that looked like something from a painting. Sarah had spent 2 years planning every detail of this day. The flowers were white peonies, her favorite. The cake was 5 tiers of vanilla and raspberry. Even the weather had cooperated, giving them a perfect 72-degree afternoon, with just enough breeze to keep the guests comfortable. Everything was exactly as Sarah had dreamed it would be. But there was one detail she had not planned for. One person she never thought would show up. And that person was about to turn her wedding into a crime scene. Let me take you back 6 months before this day. Sarah Mitchell was a pediatric nurse at Charleston General Hospital. She was the kind of person who remembered her co-workers' birthdays and brought homemade cookies to the break room. Everyone who knew Sarah described her the same way: kind, thoughtful, maybe a little too trusting. She had grown up in a small town outside of Charleston with her parents and younger brother. Her childhood was normal, maybe even boring. She did well in school, played soccer, went to church on Sundays. After nursing school, she got a job at the hospital, and that was where she met David Harper. He was a physical therapist in the rehabilitation unit. Their first conversation happened in the hospital cafeteria when Sarah accidentally spilled coffee on his white coat. She apologized so many times that David started laughing and told her she could make it up to him by having lunch with him. That lunch turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekend trips. And 6 years later, David got down on one knee in the same cafeteria where they first met and asked Sarah to be his wife. Sarah's best friend since college was a woman named Jessica Lynn. They had met during freshman orientation at the University of South Carolina and had been inseparable ever since. Jessica was different from Sarah in almost every way. Where Sarah was soft-spoken and gentle, Jessica was loud and fearless. Sarah preferred quiet nights at home with a book. Jessica loved going out, dancing, meeting new people. But somehow their friendship worked. They balanced each other out. Jessica was the maid of honor at Sarah's wedding. She helped Sarah pick out her dress. She organized the bridal shower. She was there for every dress fitting, every cake tasting, every moment of wedding planning. Sarah trusted Jessica completely. She never questioned why Jessica volunteered to handle so many details. She never noticed how Jessica's smile seemed forced whenever Sarah talked about David. And she definitely never suspected that Jessica and David were sleeping together. The affair started 8 months before the wedding. David later claimed it was a mistake, that it only happened once, that he was drunk and confused. But phone records would eventually show that David and Jessica had been texting each other almost every day for those 8 months. They met at hotels when Sarah was working night shifts at the hospital. They sent each other messages that were deleted minutes after being read. Jessica even helped David pick out Sarah's engagement ring, and according to text messages recovered by police, she made a joke about how ironic it was that she was helping him propose to someone else. David never told Sarah about the affair. Jessica never told Sarah about the affair. They both decided to keep the secret and move forward as if nothing had happened. David convinced himself that he loved Sarah and that his relationship with Jessica was just physical, just a moment of weakness. Jessica convinced herself that she was doing Sarah a favor by staying quiet, that telling the truth would only hurt everyone involved. But secrets like that do not stay buried forever. And on Sarah's wedding day, the truth was about to explode in the most horrible way possible. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you, and if you are new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The morning of the wedding, Sarah woke up feeling like she was floating. She had spent the night before at a hotel with her bridesmaids, laughing and drinking champagne and talking about the future. Jessica was there too, smiling and toasting to Sarah's happiness, giving no indication of what was about to happen. Sarah's mother helped her into her wedding dress, a custom-made gown with lace sleeves, and a long train that cost more than Sarah had ever spent on anything in her life. She looked at herself in the mirror and started crying, not because she was sad, but because she could not believe this moment was finally real. Her father knocked on the door and told her the cars were ready. Sarah took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and walked out of the hotel room toward what she thought would be the beginning of her new life. She had no idea it would be the last day of her old one. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon. Guests started arriving at 3. David stood at the altar in a navy blue suit, smiling and shaking hands with family members, looking like a man who had everything under control. But according to witnesses, David seemed nervous. He kept checking his phone. He kept looking toward the entrance as if he was expecting someone. At 3:30, Jessica arrived. She was wearing a pale pink dress and carrying a bouquet of white roses. She walked up to David and said something to him that no one else could hear. David's face went pale. He grabbed her arm and pulled her aside, away from the other groomsmen. They spoke in whispers for about 2 minutes. Jessica was shaking her head. David looked like he was about to cry. Then Jessica pulled away from him and walked toward the bridal suite where Sarah was getting ready. One of the groomsmen later told police that David looked terrified after that conversation, like he knew something bad was about to happen. Jessica walked into the bridal suite where Sarah was putting on her veil. The other bridesmaids were taking photos and fixing their makeup. Sarah smiled when she saw Jessica and said something like, "Can you believe this is really happening?" Jessica did not smile back. She asked if she could talk to Sarah alone for a minute. The other bridesmaids left the room, assuming Jessica wanted to give Sarah some kind of sentimental best friend speech before the ceremony. But that was not what Jessica wanted to say. What happened next would change everything. Jessica looked at Sarah and said, "I need to tell you something." Sarah asked what was wrong. Jessica took a deep breath and said, "I have been sleeping with David for 8 months, and I am pregnant with his baby." Sarah did not scream. She did not cry. She did not even move for a few seconds. She just stood there, holding her bouquet, staring at Jessica like she was speaking a language Sarah did not understand. Then she asked Jessica if this was some kind of joke. Jessica said no, it was not a joke, and she was sorry, but Sarah needed to know the truth before she married him. Sarah asked why Jessica was telling her this now, on her wedding day, minutes before she was supposed to walk down the aisle. Jessica said because she could not let Sarah marry David without knowing who he really was. Sarah's hands started shaking. She put down the bouquet and asked Jessica to leave. Jessica said they needed to talk about this. Sarah said no, they did not, and she told Jessica to get out. Jessica refused. She said Sarah was making a mistake, that David did not love her, that he was only marrying her because he felt obligated. That was when Sarah slapped her. The sound echoed through the room. Jessica stumbled backward, holding her face, looking shocked. Sarah told her to get out again, but this time her voice was louder, angrier. Jessica started crying and said she was only trying to help, that she thought Sarah deserved to know. Sarah said if Jessica really wanted to help, she would have told her 8 months ago instead of waiting until her wedding day to destroy her life. The two women stared at each other for a long moment. Then Jessica turned and walked out of the room. Sarah stood there alone, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her makeup was smeared. Her hands were still shaking. She could hear music starting outside, the sound of the string quartet playing the processional. In a few minutes, her father would knock on the door and ask if she was ready, and Sarah had no idea what she was going to do. She decided to go through with the wedding. Later, people would ask her why. Why did she not cancel? Why did she not confront David before the ceremony? Sarah would say that she was in shock, that she could not think clearly, that part of her still hoped Jessica was lying. But there was another reason too. Sarah had spent 2 years planning this wedding. Her family had flown in from across the country. 200 people were sitting outside waiting for her. She could not just walk away. So she wiped her face, fixed her makeup, and told herself she would deal with this after the ceremony. She would talk to David. She would figure out if Jessica was telling the truth. But first, she would walk down that aisle and finish what she started. The ceremony lasted 25 minutes. Sarah walked down the aisle on her father's arm, smiling at the guests, pretending everything was fine. David stood at the altar looking pale and nervous. When Sarah reached him, he whispered, "Are you okay?" Sarah did not answer. The officiant started talking about love and commitment and partnership. Sarah barely heard any of it. She kept looking at Jessica, who was standing with the other bridesmaids, her face red and puffy from crying. Sarah wondered if anyone else could tell something was wrong. She wondered if David knew that Jessica had told her. She wondered if this was all real, or if she was going to wake up and realize it was just a nightmare. When the officiant asked if she took David to be her husband, Sarah hesitated for just a second. Then she said, "I do." David looked relieved. He slipped the ring on her finger. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. The guests applauded. And Sarah kissed the man who had been cheating on her with her best friend for 8 months. The reception started at 5. There was a cocktail hour with past appetizers and champagne. Sarah and David stood in the receiving line, greeting guests and accepting congratulations. Sarah smiled and thanked everyone and acted like she was the happiest woman in the world. But inside, she was falling apart. Every time she looked at David, she felt sick. Every time she saw Jessica across the room, she wanted to scream. She kept thinking about what Jessica had said. "I am pregnant with his baby." Sarah did not know if that part was true. She did not know if any of it was true. She needed to talk to David. She needed answers. But she could not do it here, not in front of 200 people. So she kept smiling and pretending and waiting for the right moment. At 6:30, dinner was served. Sarah and David sat at the head table with the wedding party. Jessica was sitting 3 seats away, not eating, just staring at her plate. Sarah's mother gave a toast about how proud she was of her daughter and how much she loved David. David's father gave a toast about how lucky David was to have found someone like Sarah. Everyone raised their glasses. Sarah drank hers in one gulp. Then she excused herself and went to the bathroom. She locked herself in a stall and finally let herself cry. She cried for the wedding that was supposed to be perfect. She cried for the friendship she thought she had with Jessica. She cried for the marriage that was already broken before it even started. After a few minutes, she heard someone else come into the bathroom. She wiped her face and opened the stall door. It was Jessica. Jessica said they needed to talk. Sarah said there was nothing to talk about. Jessica said yes, there was, because David was lying to both of them. Sarah asked what she meant. Jessica said David had promised he was going to call off the wedding, that he told her he was going to tell Sarah the truth, and they would figure out what to do about the baby together. But obviously he had not done that. He had lied to Jessica, just like he had lied to Sarah. Jessica said she was sorry for telling Sarah on her wedding day, but she had waited for David to do the right thing, and he never did. Sarah stared at her. She asked if the baby was real. Jessica nodded. She said she was 12 weeks pregnant, and David was the father. Sarah felt like the floor was falling out from under her. She asked Jessica why she did it, why she slept with him, why she ruined everything. Jessica started crying again and said she did not mean for it to happen, that it just did, and she knew it was wrong, but she could not help herself. She said she had been in love with David since the day Sarah introduced them. Sarah did not know what to say to that. She just stood there, trying to breathe, trying to think. Then Jessica said something else. She said if Sarah stayed with David, she was an idiot. She said David was a liar and a cheater, and Sarah deserved better. That was when Sarah hit her again. This time it was not a slap. It was a punch, right in the face. Jessica fell backward and hit her head on the edge of the sink. There was a loud crack. Jessica collapsed on the floor, blood pooling under her head. Sarah stood there, frozen, staring at what she had just done. She did not mean to hit her that hard. She did not mean for Jessica to fall. But Jessica was not moving. Sarah knelt down and shook her, saying Jessica's name over and over, but Jessica did not respond. Her eyes were half open, but she was not blinking. Sarah checked for a pulse. There was nothing. Jessica was dead. Panic set in immediately. Sarah stood up, backing away from the body, her hands shaking, her mind racing. She had just killed her best friend. At her own wedding, in the bathroom of a venue filled with 200 people. She thought about calling for help. She thought about screaming. But then she realized what would happen if she did. Everyone would know what she had done. Her wedding would be over. Her marriage would be over. Her life would be over. She would go to prison. So instead of calling for help, Sarah made a decision. She decided to hide the body. She looked around the bathroom. There was a window on the far wall that led to the garden outside. Sarah opened it and looked out. It was getting dark. The garden was empty. She went back to Jessica's body and grabbed her under the arms. Jessica was not a big person, but she was dead weight. Sarah dragged her across the tile floor, grunting with effort, trying not to make any noise. She lifted Jessica up and pushed her through the window. The body landed in the bushes below with a soft thud. Sarah climbed through the window after her. The garden was dark and quiet. Sarah could hear the music and laughter from the reception inside, but out here it felt like a different world. She grabbed Jessica's body again and dragged it away from the building, deeper into the garden, past the roses and hedges, toward the fountain in the center. The fountain was old, made of stone, with water flowing from the mouth of a carved fish. Sarah looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then she lifted Jessica's body and pushed it into the fountain. The water turned red. Jessica's dress floated up around her like a parachute. Sarah stood there, breathing hard, staring at what she had just done. She could not believe this was real. This was not supposed to happen. This was supposed to be the best day of her life. Now it was the worst. Sarah climbed back through the bathroom window, washed the blood off her hands, fixed her makeup, and walked back into the reception like nothing had happened. For the next hour, Sarah danced with David. She cut the cake, she threw the bouquet, she smiled for photos. She acted like everything was fine, but inside, she was screaming. She kept thinking about Jessica's body in the fountain. She kept wondering when someone would find her. She kept imagining the police showing up and dragging her away in handcuffs in front of everyone. But no one seemed to notice anything was wrong. David asked her where Jessica went, and Sarah said she did not know. Maybe she left early. David said that was weird, but he did not push it. Around 8 o'clock, Sarah's mother asked if she had seen Jessica. Sarah said no. Her mother said that was strange because Jessica had been so involved in planning this wedding, it was not like her to just disappear. Sarah agreed and said maybe Jessica was not feeling well. Her mother accepted that answer and went back to dancing. At 9 o'clock, one of the guests went outside to smoke a cigarette. He walked through the garden toward the fountain, and that was when he saw it. A body floating face down in the water. He started screaming. Within seconds, people were running outside. Someone pulled Jessica's body out of the fountain. Someone else called 911. The music stopped. The reception turned into chaos. Sarah stood in the middle of the ballroom, watching through the window as paramedics arrived. David grabbed her hand and asked what happened. Sarah said she did not know. She said maybe Jessica fell. Maybe it was an accident. David said that did not make sense. Why would Jessica be outside by the fountain? Sarah did not have an answer. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They started interviewing guests, asking if anyone had seen Jessica, if anyone knew what happened. Sarah told them the same thing she told David. She did not know. She had not seen Jessica since before dinner. The police asked if Jessica had been acting strange. Sarah said yes, she had seemed upset, but she did not know why. The investigation started that night. Police officers searched the entire venue. They found blood in the bathroom. They found blood on the windowsill. They found blood in the bushes below the window. They found Sarah's fingerprints on the window frame. They found Sarah's DNA under Jessica's fingernails. They found a witness who saw Sarah and Jessica arguing in the bathroom. They found text messages on Jessica's phone about the affair. They found text messages about the pregnancy. By midnight, the police had enough evidence to arrest Sarah Mitchell for the murder of Jessica Lynn. David stood in the parking lot, watching as officers put handcuffs on his new wife and put her in the back of a squad car. He asked what was happening. The detective told him, Sarah had killed Jessica. David said that was impossible. The detective said the evidence was overwhelming. David asked why. The detective said because Jessica told Sarah about the affair and Sarah snapped. David fell to his knees on the pavement and started sobbing. His wedding day had turned into a murder scene. Sarah was charged with second-degree murder. Her trial began 6 months later. The prosecution argued that Sarah had killed Jessica in a fit of rage after learning about the affair. They presented the text messages between David and Jessica. They presented the witness who heard the argument. They presented the forensic evidence that showed Jessica had been struck in the head and drowned in the fountain. The defense argued that it was an accident, that Sarah had only meant to push Jessica away, not kill her. They said Sarah was in shock and not thinking clearly when she hid the body. They said Sarah was a kind, gentle person who had never hurt anyone in her life, and that one moment of anger should not define her forever. The jury deliberated for 3 days. They found Sarah guilty. The judge sentenced her to 18 years in prison. Sarah's parents sat in the courtroom crying. David did not come to the sentencing. He had filed for divorce 2 months after Sarah's arrest. He said he could not be married to a murderer. Jessica's parents gave a statement after the trial. They said they could not believe their daughter was gone. They said Jessica had made mistakes, but she did not deserve to die. They said they hoped Sarah would spend the rest of her life thinking about what she had done. Sarah's lawyer filed an appeal, arguing that the sentence was too harsh, but it was denied. Sarah is currently serving her sentence at a women's correctional facility in South Carolina. According to reports, she keeps to herself. She does not talk about the wedding. She does not talk about Jessica. When asked by a reporter if she regretted what she did, Sarah said of course she did, every single day. She said she wished she could go back and change everything. She said she wished she had just walked away from the wedding when Jessica told her the truth. She said she wished she had never hit her. But wishing does not bring people back. And Sarah will spend the next 12 years behind bars, knowing that one moment of anger destroyed 3 lives forever. David never remarried. He moved away from Charleston, and according to people who knew him, he became a different person after the wedding. He stopped going out. He stopped talking to friends. He blamed himself for what happened. He said if he had just told Sarah the truth from the beginning, maybe Jessica would still be alive. Maybe Sarah would not be in prison. Maybe their lives would have turned out differently. But the truth is, we will never know. What we do know is that secrets destroy people. Lies destroy people. And when you hurt the people you love, the damage is often permanent. Jessica's baby was never born. The autopsy confirmed she was 12 weeks pregnant at the time of her death. The father was confirmed through DNA to be David Harper. Jessica's family buried her in a cemetery outside of Charleston. Her headstone has a quote that says, "Gone too soon, loved forever." Every year on the anniversary of her death, her parents visit the grave and leave white roses. They said they will never stop mourning their daughter. They said they will never understand why this happened. And they said they hope that anyone watching this story will learn from it. They hope people will understand that revenge is never worth it, that anger is never worth it, that killing someone, even someone who hurt you, will never make the pain go away. It will only make it worse. Sarah's parents still visit her in prison every month. They said they will never abandon their daughter no matter what she did. They said Sarah is still their child, and they love her. But they also said they think about Jessica every day. They think about Jessica's parents. They think about how their daughter took someone else's daughter away forever. and they said if they could say anything to Jessica's family, it would be that they are sorry. They are so sorry. But sorry does not bring people back. And sorry does not undo the past. All it does is remind us that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences last a lifetime. So let me ask you this. If you were Sarah, and your best friend told you on your wedding day that she had been sleeping with your partner, what would you have done? Would you have walked away? Would you have confronted him? Would you have called off the wedding? Or would you have done what Sarah did? I want you to think about that. Think about how anger can consume you in a moment. Think about how one bad decision can change everything. And think about whether justice was truly served in this case. Was 18 years enough for taking a life? Or was Sarah also a victim, betrayed by the two people she trusted most in the world? There are no easy answers, but I want to hear what you think. Leave a comment below and tell me. Was Sarah a murderer, or was she someone who made a tragic mistake? And if you were on that jury, how would you have voted? Let me know. And if this story affected you, if it made you think about your own life and your own relationships, then share it. Because stories like this remind us why honesty matters, why trust matters, and why we should never, ever let anger control us. Because in the end, the person you hurt the most might just be yourself.